Hey everyone, welcome back to Limit Break 20. Today is a very special day because I got my hands on the Final Fantasy XIV Tabletop RPG Scenario and Game Master's Guide. And let me tell you what, this thing is packed with some really good stuff, and I want to share it with you. So, as I've been combing through this book, I wanted to share with you four things that I thought were absolutely incredible and blew me away, as well as a couple of things that I felt were a little lackluster. So, let's go ahead and dive into it. So, the first thing that really impressed me was how in depth they go on encounter design. And honestly, it's probably one of the strongest parts of the guide. So in Final Fantasy XIV Tabletop RPG, what they do is they break down the enemies into five different sections. So in Final Fantasy XIV Tabletop RPG, enemies are broken up into five categories. The first are mobs, and that is pretty self-explanatory. Really squishy enemies, put lots of them on the map, you're good to go. The second are called menaces. Now, these are still enemies that are, squishy, but they are a little bit more powerful. They pack a little bit harder punch. Then you move into champions, and champions are really designed to be single or maybe two, enemies you'd put on a battle map that are heavy hitting and really provide a little bit of challenge, have more HP, that type of thing. And next, you have solos. And solos are enemies that have a lot more HP, usually have some type of mechanic that is special and a little bit of a challenge for the party to try and take down. Now, the fifth one is called bosses. And bosses are really an entire league of their own, and they're not designed for balancing encounters. So they're actually left out for encounter balancing purposes. What's really cool is that the guide provides this awesome table that breaks down each individual level, as well as how many of each type of enemy should be for basically that tier of play. And what you usually do is you pick two of the four categories, and that's your encounter. So maybe I want to have a solo with menaces, or maybe I want to have a couple menaces with some mobs and just have it just be a massive enemy encounter, right? You get the flexibility to pick, and it's a really handy tool, especially for a busy GM. But they don't stop there. What's really amazing is that they give you guidance on how to personalize these encounters on the fly. So let's say your combat is maybe dragging out too long, or maybe you're not hitting as hard as you'd like to. They actually give you some different metrics and things that you can use in order to try to make the encounters more engaging. They also give recommendations on the average encounter length before your players should switch phases and have their abilities reset. And this is really handy because in Final Fantasy XIV Tabletop RPG, players have abilities that they can use, and those resources reset when combat takes a narrative shift called basically a change in phase. So you go from phase one to phase two. And here's the real game changer. They actually have a table that gives you the average damage per round based on your party's level. If you know how much damage your party can dish out on average per round, you can actually build an encounter with whatever you want it to be, understanding how many hit points the enemies you put on the board have and how long you want the combat encounter to last. This is an amazing tool and resource to help you navigate those encounters without having to put in a lot of guesswork. So this is the third one, and it might actually be my favorite. It's called Extended Challenges, and it's in chapter 3 of the guide. So what this does is this creates a ticking clock for your players to accomplish a specific task. So here's how it works. Let's take our diffusing a bomb situation, right? The first thing the players have to do is find the bomb. So maybe they're going to be making some intelligence checks. So for the first task, they're going to be making intelligence checks, and then you need a CR of, let's call it 14. And let's say the players have 4 rounds to find 3 bombs. Now, rounds work just like they do in combat. Everybody gets to take a turn, except there's no particular turn order. Anyone can go at any point in time. And what's really cool is that they have this handy visual guide to help you lay out this entire framework. And honestly, I think that it's something that doesn't just work for Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG. I think you can use this in any TTRPG because it's so simple and it's very easy to follow and intuitive. Absolutely great resource, and I can't praise it enough. It lays a really solid foundation for creating cool, intense encounters that aren't combat focused, and I think that's an incredibly valuable tool. All right, and number four, and probably the most obvious, it's the enemy data sets. There are over 130 different enemy stat blocks, and that is a ton of content to work with. And what I really like is how they organize it. So what they do is they break it down by monster type. So think you've got your beastkin, your seedkin like a Marlboro, or you've got your void scent. Then what they do is they organize it from the weakest. So you have your mobs, then it goes to your menaces, and then it goes to your champions, then your solos, and then your bosses. Now, what I love about it is let's say you're somebody that's like, hey, I really like this monster, but I don't know what category it is, so you don't have to comb through each page. You can just go right to the index and look at the name of the monster you're looking for, and it'll give you the exact page of the enemy stat block. So I think it's cool that they gave you a couple different ways to find these monsters, but either way is really intuitive. In addition to stat blocks, the guide also gives you enemy tactics to use in combat. And this is cool because in the scenarios themselves, they will give you those enemy tactics, but it's nice that they translated that over to the broader data set for the enemy stat blocks. The other thing, the guide also lets you know that these tactics are optional. If you feel that there is a better use or a better way to have these enemies engage in combat, feel free to do it. There's no hard and fast rule. All right, so let me talk about a couple of things that I felt were a little disappointing. The first is that not every enemy in the guide is listed in the enemy dataset or the index. There's actually enemy stat blocks that are inside the scenarios themselves that aren't included in those areas. So what that means is that you have to comb through the scenarios to find some of these additional enemies. And here's the thing, if you're playing with someone who might be running one of these scenarios for you in the future, then you're just going to be combing through and spoiling the content for yourself. And that's a bit of a bummer. The other thing is that there's really limited information on the rewards that your players can receive. Think of things like fortune or augmentations or items. They don't give any additional guidance on that. They just basically tell you, hey, here's how you can homebrew it, and here's a few different ideas. Best of luck. And if I'm being honest, that kind of sucks because in the standard rulebook, when you looked under the augmentations, which were one of the main ways that you can sort of give your character something different to do besides their abilities, there was like 11 or 13, and most of those were mid at best. And so, yeah, that's a big disappointment. That said, I still think it's a really, really good guide overall. And if you are running or plan on running a long-term campaign in Final Fantasy XIV Tabletop RPG, the Scenario and Game Master's Guide is an absolute must. And one thing to keep in mind is that the Final Fantasy XIV Tabletop RPG only has 5 levels of play. Levels 30, 40, 50, 55, and 60. And what that means is that there's no levels in between that your players experience. There's only 5 character stat sheets and abilities. So there's no leveling up to level 32 or 37 or 43, just 5 stat blocks. So if you level up every few sessions, your campaign could run at a runway quickly in terms of official content, which actually brings me to something that I've been working on for a while now. If you are looking for additional resources to extend into your campaign, I developed something called the Aurorisian Adventures Guide, which is a 55-page compendium that includes a bunch of additional homebrew rules, such as additional skill sets and things that your players can do at character creation. It includes racial bonuses for picking your race because under the current rules, that's only cosmetic. If you have a party where someone wants to play a tank and someone wants to play a dark knight, there's rules for how you go about navigating that. So basically, I also developed like 55 different augmentations. So a lot of things there for your players and your party to really kind of sink your teeth into. If you felt like that was one of the areas of the tabletop RPG that was a little bit weaker, because that is a critique that I have of this system. In addition, if you do want to see the Final Fantasy XIV tabletop RPG in action and what a long-term campaign looks like, subscribe to this channel and start watching the War of the Magi campaign that we have set in the fifth astral era. Yeah, that's the right one. I was thinking third, but that's totally different time frame. So, yeah, fifth astral era. That's where we're at. And that's my take on the scenario and game master's guide. I would love to hear from you in the comments below what your favorite parts are, or if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer those as well. And until next time, stay safe, adventurers.